Most men believe they can recognize when someone is using them. They believe manipulation is obvious. They imagine it looks dramatic, aggressive, or dishonest. But the uncomfortable truth is that the most powerful manipulation rarely looks like manipulation at all. It looks like admiration. It sounds like appreciation. It feels like connection. And that is exactly why so many intelligent, successful men walk straight into it without realizing what is happening. Because the words that slowly pull a man into the wrong dynamic do not sound dangerous. They sound flattering. They sound emotional. They sound sincere. A younger woman may look at an older man and say something that feels incredibly meaningful in the moment. She might tell him he is different from other men. She might say she feels safe around him. She might claim he understands her better than anyone ever has. And slowly, without even noticing it, the man begins investing more and more of his time, his energy, and sometimes even his resources. But here is the part nobody talks about. Certain phrases are not just compliments, they are signals. They reveal the psychology of the dynamic long before the outcome becomes obvious. And if you do not recognize these signals early, you may find yourself months or even years into a situation where you have given far more than you ever intended. This is not about blaming anyone. It is about understanding human behavior, because once you learn to recognize the patterns behind certain words, your entire perspective on relationships changes. You stop reacting emotionally to what people say, and you start paying attention to why they say it. In this conversation, we are going to break down 5 specific phrases that often appear when a younger woman is using an older man for stability, validation, or resources. These phrases are subtle, but once you hear them, you will never interpret them the same way again. So listen carefully, because the next few minutes may completely change the way you see attention, admiration, and attraction. And once you understand these patterns, you will never mistake manipulation for connection again. Let's begin with the first phrase, because it is often the one that feels the most flattering and therefore the one that men question the least. A younger woman looks at an older man and says, "You're so different from men my age." On the surface, it sounds like admiration. It sounds like she is recognizing maturity, stability, and wisdom. And for many men, particularly those who have spent years building a life, developing discipline, and learning through experience, that sentence lands exactly where it is meant to land. It validates the years of effort. It tells him that his patience, his restraint, and his growth have not gone unnoticed. But psychologically, statements like this do something deeper than simply compliment a man. They establish a dynamic. They position him in a role. The moment she says he is different from men her age, she is placing him above a comparison group. She is elevating him. And elevation is powerful because it creates emotional investment. When someone feels chosen, they begin to behave like they must live up to that choice. Now, think about that carefully. When a man hears that he is different, he unconsciously begins to protect that identity. He begins to demonstrate patience. He becomes more generous with his time. He becomes more attentive, more supportive, more understanding. He wants to prove that she was right about him. He wants to show that he truly is unlike the men she has known before. But here is the psychological question most people never ask. Why was that comparison introduced in the first place? Because when you introduce a comparison, you also introduce a subtle form of competition. Even if the other men are not physically present, the idea of them exists. The phrase implies that men her age are immature, unreliable, or incapable of understanding her. And by contrast, the older man becomes the exception. He becomes the stable figure in a chaotic world. That narrative is extremely appealing. It makes a man feel not only valued, but necessary. And when someone feels necessary in another person's life, they begin to invest more deeply. They offer guidance, emotional support, and often practical support as well. They step into the role of mentor, protector, and provider almost naturally. But this is where awareness becomes important because admiration and strategy can sometimes look identical in the early stages of interaction. Real admiration grows from observation over time. Strategy appears quickly because it is designed to create a favorable dynamic as early as possible. You will often notice that when this phrase is used in a manipulative context, it appears very early in the interaction. The younger woman does not yet know the man deeply. She has not seen him in difficult situations. She has not observed his character over time, yet the compliment arrives with certainty. You're so different from men my age. And what this does is accelerate the emotional atmosphere of the relationship. Instead of two people gradually learning about each other, one person is already being placed into a position of admiration. And when admiration appears too quickly, it should always invite curiosity rather than immediate trust, because authentic respect takes time to form. It requires evidence. It requires consistency. It requires observing someone's behavior across many different moments. Real admiration grows slowly because it is built on reality. But strategic admiration grows fast because it is built on perception. Now, this does not mean that every younger woman who says this phrase has manipulative intentions. That would be an unfair assumption. Sometimes people genuinely do feel that someone older brings a level of stability and insight that their peers may lack. That can be sincere. However, sincerity always shows itself through behavior, not just language. A sincere person will respect your boundaries. A sincere person will value your time without constantly asking you to sacrifice it. A sincere person will appreciate your presence rather than simply benefiting from your resources. Manipulation, on the other hand, slowly transforms admiration into expectation. At first, the words are flattering. Then the dynamic begins to shift. The older man finds himself paying for more things, solving more problems, offering more emotional labor. And because the relationship began with admiration, he feels responsible for maintaining that image of being the different man. This is why awareness is so important. Because flattery is not dangerous by itself. What becomes dangerous is when flattery creates a psychological obligation. When a man begins to feel that he must constantly prove he deserves the compliment he was given. A healthy dynamic never requires constant proof. In healthy relationships, respect flows both ways. Appreciation is mutual, effort is balanced. And this is the philosophical lesson many people overlook. Words can create emotional momentum. A single sentence can subtly shape the roles two people begin to play in each other's lives. The phrase, "you're different from men my age," may seem simple, but it can quietly establish a hierarchy where one person becomes the provider of stability and the other becomes the receiver of it. If that balance is mutual, there is no problem. But if it becomes one-sided, then the compliment was never about appreciation. It was about positioning. Wise men do not reject compliments, but they also do not let compliments define their role in someone else's life. They observe actions. They watch for consistency. They allow time to reveal whether admiration is real or merely convenient. And that is the deeper truth here. Being different from other men is not something you need to prove. Your character will demonstrate that naturally over time. The real question is not whether someone calls you different. The real question is whether they respect you enough to treat you as an equal rather than a resource. Because a man who understands his value does not rush to live up to someone else's flattering description. He simply continues to live by his principles and allows people to respond to that reality. And when you reach that level of awareness, something powerful happens. Compliments no longer control your behavior. They simply pass through your awareness while you continue observing the person behind the words. And that is the reflection I want to leave you with. Never let a flattering sentence decide the role you play in someone's life. Let their actions decide whether they deserve a place in yours. Now let's move to the second phrase, because this one is even more powerful on a psychological level. A younger woman looks at an older man and says, "I feel so safe with you." At first glance, this sounds like one of the most beautiful compliments a man can receive. Safety is a deep human need. It represents trust, comfort, emotional protection, and reliability. For many men, hearing those words immediately activates a sense of responsibility. It touches something instinctive inside them, something ancient in the psychology of men. Men, by nature and by social conditioning, often define their value through protection and provision. They want to be the person someone can rely on when life becomes difficult. They want to be the calm presence in someone's storm. So when a woman says she feels safe with them, it confirms an identity many men already want to believe about themselves. It tells them they are strong, dependable, and emotionally secure. But the interesting thing about language is that certain words carry multiple meanings, and the word safe is one of them. Safety can refer to emotional safety, where someone feels respected, understood, and free to express themselves without fear of judgment. But safety can also refer to practical security. It can mean stability, financial comfort, and a predictable lifestyle. And this is where awareness becomes important. Because sometimes when a younger woman says she feels safe with an older man, what she is truly describing is the stability he represents. He has experience, he has resources, he has already built the foundations of his life, compared to men her own age who may still be discovering themselves. The older man appears calm, grounded, and established. There is nothing inherently wrong with appreciating stability. In fact, maturity and stability are valuable traits in any relationship. However, the question you must ask yourself is whether the safety she describes is connected to you as a person or connected to what you provide as a structure in her life. You see, emotional safety comes from respect, communication, and genuine care. It grows slowly as two people reveal their vulnerabilities and support each other through challenges. It is mutual and balanced. Both individuals feel protected in the presence of the other, but strategic safety is different. Strategic safety is when one person feels secure because the other person is carrying most of the responsibility in the dynamic. The older man becomes the emotional anchor, the financial backup, the problem solver, and the stabilizing force all at once. And at first, this can feel flattering. Being needed often feels like being loved. When someone constantly tells you that your presence makes them feel calm, that your guidance helps them navigate life, that your support makes them feel protected, it creates a powerful emotional bond. But here is where psychological maturity requires honesty. Being needed and being valued are not always the same thing. A person can need what you provide without truly valuing who you are. They can appreciate the security of your presence while remaining emotionally detached from the deeper connection required in a healthy relationship. You will notice this difference through behavior rather than words. When someone genuinely values you, they respect your boundaries. They consider your needs as much as their own. They recognize that safety must exist for both people in the relationship. But when someone is primarily drawn to the security you represent, the dynamic becomes one-sided over time. You are the one solving problems. You are the one offering reassurance. You are the one absorbing stress while they receive comfort. And slowly, without realizing it, the relationship becomes less about connection and more about dependency. Dependency can feel like intimacy in the beginning because it creates constant interaction and emotional intensity. But true intimacy requires equality. Both individuals must contribute to the emotional stability of the relationship. If only one person carries that role, the connection becomes unbalanced. There is also a philosophical dimension to this that many people overlook. When someone defines their safety entirely through another person, they are often avoiding the responsibility of developing their own stability. Personal growth requires individuals to build their own sense of security, their own resilience, and their own emotional independence. When someone relies too heavily on another person to provide that foundation, the relationship becomes a substitute for personal development rather than a partnership between two developed individuals. This is why wise men learn to listen carefully when they hear phrases like, "I feel safe with you." They do not reject the compliment, but they observe what follows. They watch whether the safety is mutual. They notice whether appreciation is expressed through consistent respect or simply through repeated praise. Real safety is reciprocal. When two people care about each other deeply, both feel calmer in the presence of the other. Both contribute to the emotional stability of the relationship. But when safety only flows in one direction, the dynamic eventually becomes exhausting. One person gives reassurance while the other constantly receives it. And over time, that imbalance reveals the truth behind the words. This does not mean a man should stop being supportive or compassionate. Strength and generosity are admirable qualities, but those qualities must be protected with awareness. A man who understands his value does not allow his stability to become something others depend on without also offering respect and commitment in return. Because true relationships are not built on one person carrying the emotional weight for both individuals. They are built on shared responsibility, shared growth, and shared accountability. So when someone tells you they feel safe with you, accept the words with grace, but observe the actions that follow. Watch whether that safety inspires mutual respect or whether it quietly transforms you into the permanent source of stability in someone else's life. And this is the thought I want to leave you with. If someone feels safe with you, that is a compliment. But if the relationship only works because you are the one creating all the safety, then you are not experiencing partnership. You are experiencing far deeper. And the moment you learn the difference between the two is the moment you stop being used for your strength and start being respected for it. Now let's talk about the third phrase, because this is where the emotional dynamic often becomes much deeper and much more. A younger woman looks at an older man and says, "I've never met someone who understands me like you do." On the surface, this sounds like one of the most meaningful compliments a person can give. To be understood is a fundamental human desire. People spend years in relationships, friendships, and even families feeling misunderstood. So when someone tells you that you understand them better than anyone else ever has, it can feel incredibly intimate. It feels like connection. It feels like emotional chemistry. It feels like you have discovered something rare. And this is exactly why the phrase is so powerful, because understanding creates the illusion of deep emotional closeness. When someone believes they're understood, they begin to trust more quickly. They begin to open up. They begin to invest emotionally in the person who seems to see them so clearly. But here is something very important to recognize. Real understanding does not happen instantly. It develops through time, observation, and shared experience. It comes from witnessing how someone behaves in different situations. It comes from learning how they respond to pressure, disappointment, success, and conflict. True understanding requires patience. So, when someone tells you very early in a connection that you understand them better than anyone else, you have to pause and think carefully about what is actually happening. Because sometimes what feels like understanding is actually mirroring. Mirroring is a psychological behavior where someone reflects your opinions, your values, and your perspectives back to you in order to create rapid connection. When someone mirrors you effectively, it feels like they share your worldview. It feels like they think the way you think and see life the way you see it. And when that happens, the brain interprets it as compatibility. You begin to believe that you have found someone who truly gets you, someone who appreciates your thoughts, respects your experiences, and connects with your perspective in a way others never have. But compatibility revealed too quickly can sometimes be performance rather than authenticity. This is why emotional intelligence requires observation rather than immediate belief. Anyone can repeat the right words, anyone can nod in agreement and reflect your ideas back to you. But genuine understanding shows itself not just through agreement, but through consistent behavior over time. Understanding means someone respects your boundaries, even when it is inconvenient for them. Understanding means they care about your emotional well being as much as their own desires. Understanding means they listen when you speak about your values, and they treat those values in those behaviors are missing, then the words "I understand you" may simply be creating a feeling rather than reflecting a reality. And feelings can be incredibly persuasive. Many older men, especially those who have spent years developing wisdom through life experience, appreciate being intellectually and emotionally recognized. They enjoy conversations that go beyond surface level topics. They enjoy feeling that someone genuinely appreciates their perspective. So when a younger woman expresses that she feels deeply understood by them and that she believes they understand her as well, it creates a powerful bond of shared insight. It makes the man feel respected, not just for his stability, but for his mind. However, this is also where emotional investment can accelerate very quickly. The man begins to see himself as the person who truly understands her struggles, her ambitions, her fears, and her dreams. He begins to take on the role of emotional guide and supporter. And once again, there is nothing wrong with offering emotional support. In fact, empathy is one of the most valuable qualities a human being can possess. But empathy must be balanced with awareness. If you are constantly the one listening, guiding, advising, and emotionally supporting, while the other person contributes very little to your emotional well-being, then the relationship may not be based on mutual understanding. It may be based on emotional dependency. Dependency can look like intimacy in the early stages because it creates constant communication and emotional intensity. But true intimacy is reciprocal. Both people feel seen. Both people feel heard. Both people feel understood. In one-sided dynamics, however, one person becomes the emotional foundation while the other simply receives that support. This is where wisdom becomes important, because people who have developed maturity through life experience should not confuse emotional attention with genuine connection. Someone may spend hours sharing their problems with you. They may tell you that you are the only person who truly understands them. They may express gratitude for your insight and your patience. But if that understanding never translates into equal care for your needs, your boundaries, and your emotional life, then the connection is incomplete. Real understanding is demonstrated through action. It appears in how someone treats you when you are not giving them advice. It appears in whether they respect your time, your energy, and your priorities. It appears in whether they support your growth as much as you support theirs. Words about understanding are easy to say. Living in a way that proves those words requires character. This is why wise individuals listen to compliments with appreciation, but measure relationships through consistency. If someone truly understands you, they will not just admire your wisdom, they will respect the life you have built. They will recognize your boundaries and protect them rather than test them, because understanding is not about repeating what someone wants to hear. Understanding is about demonstrating that you value who they are, even when it requires effort and discipline. So when someone tells you that you understand them like no one else ever has, accept the compliment with calm awareness. But do not rush to build emotional loyalty around those words alone. Observe whether that understanding grows deeper through actions, because real connection becomes stronger with time. It becomes clearer with consistency. It becomes undeniable through mutual respect. And that leads to the reflection I want to leave you with. Anyone can claim to understand you in a moment of conversation, but only a person with genuine character will prove that understanding through the way they treat you over time. So do not measure connection by how deeply someone says you understand them. Measure it by how deeply they demonstrate that they understand you. Now, let's move to the fourth phrase, because this one sounds harmless, almost casual, yet psychologically it can be one of the most influential statements in shaping a man's behavior. A younger woman looks at an older man and says, "I wish more men were like you." At first, this feels like a simple compliment. It feels like admiration. It feels like she is recognizing something rare in your character. And naturally, most men respond positively to this. After all, who does not want to feel exceptional? Who does not want to feel that their maturity, their discipline, and their perspective stand out from the crowd? Especially for men who have spent years developing themselves, learning through mistakes, and building a life with patience, this sentence can feel like confirmation that their growth has meaning. But when we look at this statement carefully, we begin to see the deeper psychology behind it. Because when someone says they wish more men were like you, they are doing two things at the same time. First, they are elevating you. They are placing you above other men in a moral or emotional hierarchy. But second, they are creating a narrative where you become the exception to a negative pattern. And the moment you become the exception, a subtle pressure appears. You begin to feel responsible for maintaining that identity. Now think about how powerful that is psychologically. If someone repeatedly tells you that you are different, that you are better, that you are the rare type of man who understands, supports, and behaves with maturity, then naturally you begin to protect that identity. You begin to act in ways that reinforce it. You become more patient, you become more generous, you become more forgiving. And again, these are not negative qualities. Patience, generosity, and emotional maturity are admirable traits. But when they are constantly reinforced through praise, they can quietly turn into expectations. The compliment slowly becomes a standard you feel obligated to maintain. This is where awareness becomes essential, because genuine admiration and subtle manipulation can sometimes look very similar in the early stages of interaction. A sincere person may truly appreciate the qualities they see in you. They may genuinely feel that your maturity stands out compared to people they have encountered before. However, sincere admiration is usually balanced with accountability. It respects your time, your boundaries, and your individuality. But when admiration becomes a tool for influence, the dynamic begins to shift. The older man starts doing more and more to maintain the identity he has been given. He becomes the reliable one, the understanding one, the generous one, the emotionally available one. And slowly the relationship begins to revolve around him, proving that he deserves the praise he receives. Philosophically, this touches on something deeper about human behavior. People often try to live up to the identities that others assign to them. If someone repeatedly calls you intelligent, you feel motivated to demonstrate intelligence. If someone calls you kind, you feel motivated to behave kindly. Identity influences behavior. So when someone tells a man that he is unlike other men, that he is rare, that he is exceptional, it can shape the way he behaves in that relationship. He begins to invest more effort in maintaining that image. But here is the critical question that must be asked. Is the admiration accompanied by equal respect and contribution? Because in healthy relationships, appreciation is mutual. Both people recognize the value the other brings. Both individuals invest effort, care, and emotional presence. But in one-sided dynamics, admiration becomes a currency that keeps one person giving while the other continues receiving. The man hears praise about his character, his maturity, his kindness. And in response, he continues offering support, attention, resources, and emotional labor. Meanwhile, the other person contributes far less while still benefiting from the dynamic. And because the praise continues, the imbalance can remain hidden for a long time. This is why wisdom requires more than simply listening to flattering words. It requires observing the pattern of behavior that follows those words. A person who genuinely respects you will not just admire your qualities, they will also protect them. They will not place constant demands on your patience. They will not expect endless generosity without reciprocation. They will recognize that your time, your energy, and your attention have value. Real admiration inspires mutual growth. Manipulative admiration encourages one person to keep giving while the other avoids responsibility. There is also something important to understand about emotional maturity. Mature individuals do not need constant validation of their identity. They know who they are through their principles, their actions, and their experiences. When someone else describes them as exceptional, they appreciate the compliment, but they do not feel obligated to prove it endlessly. Because the moment you start performing your character for someone else's approval, you lose the authenticity that made your character valuable in the first place. And that is where many people fall into a quiet trap. They start behaving not from their own values, but from the desire to maintain someone else's flattering perception of them. True confidence does not work that way. True confidence allows a person to receive admiration without becoming dependent on it. It allows them to stay grounded in their own principles rather than adjusting their behavior to keep someone impressed. So when someone tells you that they wish more men were like you, take it as a compliment, but do not let it become a responsibility. Your role in someone's life should not be defined by how well you maintain an image they created for you. Your role should be defined by mutual respect, shared effort, and honest connection. And this leads to the reflection I want you to carry with you. Admiration is meaningful, but admiration alone does not create a healthy relationship. What matters is whether that admiration is matched with equal appreciation for your boundaries, your time, and your humanity. Because a wise man does not spend his life trying to prove he is different from other men. He simply lives according to his values and allows the right people to recognize that difference without demanding that he constantly perform it. Now, let's come to the fifth phrase, because this is often the moment where the entire dynamic of the relationship becomes clear, even though many people fail to recognize it at the time. A younger woman says to an older man, "You know I really care about you, but I'm just not ready for something serious right now." At first, this sentence sounds honest. It sounds thoughtful. It sounds like someone who is trying to communicate their emotional boundaries. And in many situations, that is exactly what it is. People sometimes need time. They may be healing from past relationships, focusing on personal growth, or simply not ready to commit to something long term. But context is everything. The meaning of this sentence changes dramatically depending on when it appears and what has already happened in the relationship. If someone expresses this very early, before deep emotional involvement or significant investment has taken place, it may simply be a clear and responsible statement. It allows both individuals to understand the situation and decide whether they want to continue. However, in many cases, this phrase appears much later. It appears after emotional bonding has already developed. It appears after time, attention, and often financial generosity have already been given. It appears after the older man has invested not just resources, but also care, patience, and emotional support. And that is where the dynamic becomes complicated. Because what this phrase does psychologically is create a very specific position for both people. The man remains emotionally invested while the woman maintains distance from commitment. The connection continues, but the responsibility of defining the relationship is postponed indefinitely. This creates a space where benefits can continue without obligations. Now it is important to understand something about human psychology. When someone has already invested time, energy, and emotion into a relationship, they often become reluctant to walk away. They think about what they have already given. They remember the moments of connection. They hold on to the possibility that things might change in the future. Hope becomes the emotional currency that keeps the relationship moving forward. The man tells himself that patience will eventually lead to commitment. He believes that if he continues to be supportive, understanding, and present, she may eventually decide she is ready for something serious. But this is where emotional maturity requires clarity. Commitment does not usually emerge from indefinite patience. It emerges from genuine desire. When two people truly want a relationship, they naturally move toward clarity rather than away from it. They seek stability rather than ambiguity. Ambiguity is comfortable only for the person who benefits from the lack of definition. Philosophically, this situation touches on a deeper principle about relationships. Every connection between two people operates on some form of agreement, even if that agreement is unspoken. Healthy relationships involve mutual understanding about expectations, boundaries, and intentions. When one person repeatedly delays that understanding while continuing to enjoy the benefits of the connection, the agreement becomes unbalanced. The older man continues giving emotional presence, time, guidance, and sometimes financial support. Meanwhile, the woman retains the freedom of someone who has not committed to anything permanent. And because the words "I care about you" are included in the statement, it softens the impact. It reassures the man that his feelings are recognized, even though the relationship remains undefined. But caring and committing are not the same thing. A person can care about someone while still choosing not to build a life with them. They can enjoy the emotional support, the conversations, and the stability that person provides without taking the step toward deeper responsibility. This is why awareness becomes crucial. Wise individuals learn to listen not only to what someone says, but to the pattern of their decisions. Words can create comfort, but decisions reveal priorities. If someone consistently avoids defining the relationship while continuing to accept the benefits of your presence, their behavior is telling you something important. It is telling you that the current arrangement works for them exactly as it is. And this is where self-respect must enter the conversation. A man who values himself understands that his time, his energy, and his emotional investment are meaningful resources. They are not things to be offered endlessly in the hope that someone else will eventually recognize their worth. Mutual commitment is not something that should be negotiated through endless patience. It is something that naturally emerges when both individuals genuinely want the same future. This does not mean becoming cold or cynical. It simply means developing the clarity to recognize when a relationship is moving toward growth and when it is remaining suspended in uncertainty. There is also a philosophical truth here about human nature. People often delay decisions when they are comfortable but not fully invested. As long as the situation continues to provide emotional support, attention, or stability, there is little motivation to change it. This is why boundaries are essential. Boundaries are not punishments. They are expressions of self-respect. They communicate that your time and emotional presence are valuable and that they must exist within relationships that move toward clarity rather than endless ambiguity. A man who understands this does not become angry when someone says they are not ready for something serious. Instead, he calmly evaluates whether the situation aligns with his own goals and values. If it does not, he has the strength to step away with dignity, because the truth is simple. The right person does not need unlimited time to recognize your value. They move carefully, but they move forward. So when you hear the words, "I care about you, but I'm not ready for something serious right now," do not react emotionally in the moment. Listen carefully, observe what follows, and decide whether the relationship is moving toward commitment or simply maintaining comfort. And here is the thought I want to leave you with. Affection without commitment can feel meaningful for a while, but over time it becomes a place where one person waits while the other remains free. A wise man does not build his life in a waiting room. He chooses relationships where care, respect, and commitment grow in the same direction.